I'm Charles Duhigg, a writer at the New Yorker magazine and the author of The Power of Habit, Supercommunicators, and Smarter, Faster, Better.
How to navigate difficult social situations.
The social conversation, or the who are we conversation, it comes up when we're talking about how we see ourselves in the world. They'll say things like, as a Democrat, as a Republican, as a gun owner. Or they might just talk about their own experiences in a way that tells you how they see themselves. Look, here's an identity that's important to me. As a woman, this is something that I see a little bit differently than you. As the boss, there's certain responsibilities I have that I have to act on. And I don't need you to solve or make plans around the social issue. I also don't need you to empathize. What I need you to acknowledge. I need you to acknowledge my expertise. I need you to acknowledge that I am the person who I'm saying I am. We can look for these clues where people talk about their identity. It's not hard to tell when we're in a social conversation because people are talking about themselves. They're announcing their identity, or they're talking about other people's identities, right? I can't stand Susie. She drives me crazy. She just will not shut up during meetings. She's making me nuts. That's a social conversation. I'm telling you how I relate to other people. Being that person gives me certain insights. If nothing else, it gives me insights into at least how I see the world. And in that conversation, it's really important that I acknowledge your identity, which is clearly important to you, is also important to me. And maybe I disagree with you. Maybe I think we should do things differently, but I'm not going to invalidate you by saying you don't know what you're talking about. If you're feeling uncomfortable in a social conversation, if someone brings up an identity that feels like you just don't have any experience with it, or you're worried you're going to say the wrong thing, the best thing to do is just to ask them a question. Let's talk about conversations about race. Very often, a conversation will emerge about race with people who are different races, right? They might be Asian, they might be Black, they might be white. And suddenly everyone's on tenterhooks. Everyone's walking on eggshells because they don't want to say the wrong thing. The best thing that we can do is we can acknowledge someone's identity by asking them a question. By saying, look, I'm just wondering, do you think you see this issue differently than I see it? And if so, I want to understand how you see it. That's the most benign question I could ask, right? I'm not saying, as a Black man, you need to represent all Black men in America. I'm simply asking you, do you think that your identity is a little bit different from mine and that gives you a different vantage point? And that person might say, no. I mean, look, you're white, I'm Black, but we're both bankers and we both went to the same college. And so I actually think we see this the same way. Or they might say, thank you for asking. As an employee who is Black in this largely white company, I actually have had a little bit of different experiences. And I think that that's shaped how I see things a little bit differently. In that identity conversation, when we simply acknowledge that someone is an expert on their own experiences, when we simply acknowledge that by virtue of the fact that you are alive and you have lived within your own body and you have lived within your own culture, you are an expert on how you see the world, what we're doing is we're validating their identity and we're giving them a chance to share with us who they are. Looping for understanding can make essentially any conversation better, right? Because I'm just proving to you that I'm listening to you. But particularly in a social conversation, it can be really powerful because oftentimes a social conversation plays out like this. Someone comes in and they say, as a gun owner, it matters a lot to me that we protect the Second Amendment. And this is something, I learned to hunt with my dad. I want to be able to hunt with my own kids. And you person who are pushing for gun control, everything about you just seems like you're trying to limit who I am. Okay, there's a really important signal there. What they've said is, as a gun owner, they're talking about their experiences. They're talking about who they are, how they see themselves. And me, as the person who's talking to them, the gun control advocate, I need to start that conversation by acknowledging their identity. I need to say to them, what I hear you saying is that you don't think that everyone should have guns, but what I hear you saying is guns have been a really important part of your family. And you use them really safely and responsibly. And for me to come in and try and take those away from you seems like an overreaction. It seems like I don't care about you. I don't care about your experiences. What I hear you saying is that you, as a gun owner, you see real value in guns. Am I getting that right? Am I understanding why you feel so strongly about this? At that moment, what I've done is I've looped for understanding, right? I've proven to them that I'm not only paying attention, but I'm processing what they're telling me. That person is going to feel listened to. And they're going to say, yeah, no, I think you understand that, like, I'm not all for, I think some gun laws are good laws, but in general, I think that most people use them responsibly. Then at that moment, I can say, as the gun control person, I can say, totally hear what you're saying. Let me tell you about my experiences. I had a daughter in a school where there was a school shooting. And I didn't really grow up with guns, so I don't have the same experiences that you do with them. And to me, they just seem terrifying. It just seems like something that's brought all this stress into my life and into my daughter's life. At that moment, we disagree about something. We disagree about guns. But instead of saying you are right, you are wrong and I am right, or I'm smart and you're dumb, what each person is saying is, here's who I am. Here's my experience. Here's my identity that informs how I see the world. And as long as I can share my identity and you acknowledge it, then even if we don't agree with each other, we feel like we can understand each other. And we'll probably find some things that we do agree on to help us build a relationship. So there was this experiment that was done at Harvard Business School a few years ago, where they brought in a bunch of students and they said to them, okay, look, what we're going to do is in about 3 minutes, you're going to have a conversation with a stranger. And this is like the most anxiety-producing thing you can ask someone to do, right? And they said, but before the conversation starts, what we want you to do is we want you to take out a piece of paper and just write 3 things you might talk about. It might be 3 questions, like, did you go to that movie last week? Or what did you think of the game? It might be just 3 things about yourself. Oh, I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I have 9 siblings. It could be anything. Just write down 3 things that you might talk about. And then go ahead and put that piece of paper in your back pocket. Everyone does it. Takes about 45 seconds. Then they pair them all off and they say, okay, go have a conversation with a stranger. And they have the conversations and they go really well. They go much better than people anticipate they're going to go. And then afterwards, they ask them, just out of curiosity, did you ever ask one of those questions or bring up one of those topics that you had written down on the piece of paper? And most people said, no, it never came up. But you know what? That conversation went so much better than I thought it was going to go because I felt like I had something to fall back on. This is how we prepare for conversations. The best communicators, the supercommunicators, they often have a little list of questions and topics inside their head that they enjoy talking about, and they're probably not going to come up. It gives them a sense of confidence about having that conversation. And so the question is, when we're having this social conversation, if I bring up something about myself and I invite you to join me there and you decline, that's okay. We don't ever have to have a conversation about anything that we don't want to have a conversation about. Sometimes we want to announce our identity. Sometimes we want to talk about how we're different from everyone else and what that means and how we see the world. And sometimes we don't. Sometimes we want to say, I just want to forget that this difference exists between us because I don't think it's important to us right now. And so in those moments, the best thing that we can do is we can ask a question, we can invite someone to share with us. And if they don't share with us, we can move on to the next topic because we've got that little piece of paper in our back pocket that tells us, here's something else I can talk about. Here's another question I can ask. It's a little bit of a dance. And what I'm doing is I'm letting you lead and then I'm leading in return. But the dance only goes well when we pay attention to the signals that the other person are giving us. So I have two boys, a 14-year-old and a 17-year-old. And one of the things I found is that I love asking them deep questions. In fact, there's a list of deep questions that's known as the Fast Friends procedure that are just questions you can ask each other. If you could invite anyone to dinner, who would you invite? Or do you have a secret suspicion about how you're going to die? Right? These are all great questions. And what I found is that oftentimes, if I ask my kids those questions around the dinner table, they won't play along at all. They're like, whatever, I don't want to talk about that. But in a car ride, suddenly I ask that question and they're off on a blue streak. They're telling me all about their life. So what's different there? Well, it has to do with body language. It has to do with how our physical surroundings impact the conversations we have. Because when we're on a car ride and we're not looking at each other, it's a lot easier sometimes to say something vulnerable and real. We don't have to worry about what the reflection that we're seeing in the other person's face and how they're reacting. And they don't have to worry about self-monitoring. They don't have to worry about making sure that they're showing you what they're feeling, that they're agreeing with you. There are some conversations that are better off when we're sitting side by side than when we're sitting face to face. There are some conversations that are better off as an email than they are in person. The best communicators, it's not that they have one form of communication. It's that they pay attention to the strengths and weaknesses of different channels of communication, of different environments for communication. The best communicators, they are not born with any special skills. They just pay a little bit more attention to how communication works. They think a little bit more about how they ought to communicate and when they ought to communicate. And that makes all the difference. That's what makes them into a super communicator. Our environment can have a huge impact on how we connect with each other. An important part of that is to understand the salience of the environment. So if I'm wearing an Obama shirt and I'm at a family reunion where I know almost everyone voted for Obama, it's not really that big a deal to wear the Obama shirt. Most people might not even realize that I'm wearing it. If they do, they might say, hey, I love Obama. You love Obama. We're great. And we're also cousins, right? But if I wear an Obama shirt at an NRA convention, then everyone will pay attention to the shirt that I'm wearing and they'll make a bunch of judgments about me. And so one of the things that we want to do is we want to pay attention to the salience of the environment that we're operating in. And we want to take advantage of that. That doesn't mean that I shouldn't wear an Obama shirt to an NRA convention, but it does mean that if I wear that shirt, I should be prepared for how people are going to react to it. And what I might want to do is I might want to wear something that says, for instance, an NRA hat and an Obama shirt. I want to help people understand that as a person, I'm filled with many identities. When an identity conversation or a social conversation or a who are we conversation doesn't go well, it's usually because I'm focused on one identity that you have and you're focused on one identity that I have. You voted for Obama and I voted for Trump. You like guns and I hate guns. But the truth of the matter is, there's all these other identities. We both live on the same street and the potholes in the street are a big issue for us. We both have kids who are in the third grade and we're going through all the things that you go through with third graders. The key in an identity conversation is not to focus on just one identity, but rather to invite people to share all of their identities. If you walk away from a conversation and someone's saying something like, you know, as an Obama voter, this is how I feel, but as a gun owner, I also think this. And as someone who grew up overseas, I kind of see all these things a little bit differently. That's a conversation that everyone is going to feel great walking away from because I've gotten to share the fullness of who I am with you. And my guess is that you in return have shared the fullness of yourself with me. And so instead of just disagreeing because we have these two identities that disagree with each other, what we're doing is we're finding the interesting complexities in what we believe. If you think about it, communication is Homo sapiens' superpower, right? It is the thing that has allowed our species to be so successful. It's the thing that sets us apart from every other species on Earth. And the reason why communication emerged is to help us feel connected to each other. Because if we don't feel connected to each other, if we don't feel like we can trust each other, we never make our way out of the trees. We never build these villages and these towns and these cities. We never come together to form a new government. And that does not mean that we have to agree with each other all the time. In fact, if you look at this nation and the moments we're proudest of, it is not because everyone agreed with each other. It's because we disagreed with each other in a productive way. If you think about the Constitutional Convention, right? The thing when the forefathers came together to write the Constitution for America, they hated each other. There were all these factions in there that thought the other people were either morons or completely corrupt. And all they did was argue day after day after day. But they managed to argue in a way where everyone felt like the other people were listening to them, where they all felt connected enough to write a constitution that we're still using today. The best communicators, they were not born that way. In fact, if you ask supercommunicators if they've always been good at communication, they'll inevitably say something like, no, Like when I was in high school, I had trouble making friends, so I really had to study how kids talk to each other. Or my parents got divorced when I was a kid, and I had to be the peacemaker between them. The best communicators aren't born with the gift of gab. The best communicators become the best communicators because they spend a little bit more time thinking about communication. Because they spend a little bit more time trying to understand how their words have an impact on others. Because they understand that the goal of conversation is not to agree with each other. The goal is simply to feel connected to each other. But if you feel like I am genuinely listening to you, that I'm curious about who you are, that I want to understand how you see the world, and if I can speak in a way that helps you understand how I see the world, that helps you be curious about who I am, if for no other reason than just because of this social reciprocity that we all feel, at that moment, we will feel connected to each other. And it's that wonderful feeling that gave birth to the American Constitution, that gives birth to people getting married, that gives birth to finding your best friend and feeling so good just because you had a conversation with them.
Want to support the channel? Join the Big Think members community where you get access to videos early, ad-free.